Round two starts off with a trio of wide receivers getting new homes. And I'll tell you what, it feels like none of them are going to step on the toes of any other wide receiver that we care about in fantasy. Keon Coleman to Buffalo. Buffalo doesn't have Stephon Diggs or Gabe Davis anymore. We've got Ladd McConkey going to the Chargers. No Keenan Allen, no Mike Williams there. And then Ja'Lynn Polk to the Patriots. I don't know if we could name three Patriots receivers. How do you feel about these three guys?
I am afraid that Demario Douglas's diminutive toes are going to get stepped on in New England. But yeah, I think you're mostly right. You wonder if Keon Coleman steps on the toes of Dalton Kincaid, maybe just a little bit.
Sure.
But for the most part, I think the point that you're making is good and valid in that these guys have an opportunity to earn however many targets they deserve.
Let's start with Ja'Lynn Polk in New England. And you mentioned who's there. Demario Douglas is there. I'll name you two more Patriots receivers. KJ Osborne is there on a 1-year deal. Remember him from Minnesota. And then also Juju Smith-Schuster. Remember him from Pittsburgh, from Kansas City? These are not exactly outstanding talents. Yeah, Kendrick Bourne too. He's just coming back from the ACL. I wonder if Ja'Lynn Polk will have an opportunity to get a decent target share there and to develop alongside Drake May. The one thing that I'll tell you about Ja'Lynn Polk, he's the receiver, wasn't Odunze as much. He's the receiver that made me think twice about Michael Penix being this awesome thrower. No, cover your ears, Atlanta Falcons fans. But I felt like Polk was so good at adjusting to off-target throws and laying all out to get every catch he could that helped Penix's completion rate and all of his other metrics that helped make him a good-looking prospect for the NFL. And so being paired with Drake May could have the exact same effect there. I'm wondering if he could lead the Patriots in targets this year. Not that means he'll be a top 30 type of fantasy receiver.
Right. That's the thing.
Someone I might be interested in drafting with a late pick.
I will say, just to preface this, because I'm not particularly down on Ja'Lynn Polk, and I do think it's a good opportunity. But I also would understand if someone's kind of taking the stance right now that I'm just not going to draft or acquire any Patriots until they prove me wrong. And if you'd done that 5 years ago, you'd have had a pretty hefty profit. So I'm a little bit like, I downgraded Drake May because he landed in New England.
Sure.
Ja'Lynn Polk got probably a little bit better draft capital here than I was expecting, a top 40 pick. That's fantastic. That's the good news. The bad news is I'm more worried still about the New England situation dragging these guys down than Drake May and Ja'Lynn Polk turning the franchise around.
Let's talk about the other two wide receivers. Which one do you want to talk about first? Keon Coleman or Ladd McConkey?
Well, let's get excited. I am extremely excited about Ladd McConkey, the guy I think Dan Schneider just referred to in the Slack as like supercharged Keenan Allen. And he is a great route runner, except the difference is like Ladd McConkey makes big plays. He averaged 15.9 yards per catch his last year at Georgia. He does stuff down the field and he does stuff after the catch. So it's kind of like Keenan Allen if he didn't fall down but also like Keenan Allen, there's some injury concerns with McConkey.
There are. That's in his past. I'll tell you from watching him at the Senior Bowl, just unbelievable separator. When we're talking about running, and you talked about this with Keenan Allen and Schneider, I believe he called him 4.39 Keenan Allen.
There you go.
Because he's that type of receiver. He didn't play in the slot a lot at Georgia, but in the NFL, he could. And he might end up being a big-time slot receiver for the Chargers, might end up playing that Roman Wilson role that Wilson played at Michigan, where he lines up mostly in the slot, but he could line up wide and he can win downfield. And McConkey can do all those things. At the Senior Bowl, he was the only way you could cover Ladd McConkey is if you grabbed him or if you were physical with him. So maybe like an underthrown pass. Now he's got to jostle for position against a cornerback. Those were times where he lost. But anytime he had free release, anytime he was able to just get a step on a guy, he was wide open. And I think that that's something that will pay off in a heavy way for Justin Herbert and the Chargers. McConkey absolutely in PPR has a chance to get 70 catches as a rookie. Does it bother you, Heath Cummings, that his career high at Georgia, 762 yards, 58 in 15 games?
I mean, you have to put that in the context of the offense that they ran and the fact that they had a tight end that led them in receiving every year that he was there, I believe. Brock Bowers, who did that as an 18-year-old. So not really. I think realistically, like, and Dan was kind of making the point of how it might be different in redraft versus dynasty, but for this year, McConkey might be the second best rookie wide receiver. I'm not sure. Like maybe Neighbors with Daniel Jones is better, but Marvin Harrison is going to be better than Lad McConkey. I feel pretty confident. I I wouldn't, just because we saw Xavier Worthy and Brian Thomas get drafted yesterday, automatically assume that they should be ahead of McConkey in redraft this year. I think McConkey could be the best of the three.
I think catches count, and obviously target
Mhm.
volume counts. And I'm not a believer that the Chargers are going to go full Wolverine and run the ball 45 times a game. I think that they're going to end up being pretty balanced, maybe even lean into Justin Herbert. Sound crazy? So if this guy's the number one target there, we could start the bidding at 100 targets. I think he could get to potentially 120. And if he does that, he's catching more than 70 passes. I think that there is definitely some merit to what you're saying. So you'll take McConkey over Polk at this point.
Oh, yes.
Where does Coleman fit in? Is he ahead of McConkey, behind Polk?
He is in the middle of those two guys. I First off, I wasn't quite as excited about Coleman coming into the draft. So that might be why I would still have him behind McConkey here. I think there's a little bit more target competition where he went in Buffalo, even though there's not anybody that will prevent him from reaching his potential. It's better than Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston. So
Sure.
I would expect McConkey to earn more targets, and I think McConkey's a better player, so I think he'll be more efficient with those targets. But as far as potential outcomes for Keon Coleman, if you told me he's not going to go in round one, this is as good as it gets. Obviously, he was picked right after round one ended, and then he was taken by the Buffalo Bills.
Is he a slower, more physical, and maybe a little bit more of a gamer type of receiver than Gabe Davis was for Buffalo? So Gabe Davis, just to refresh everybody's memory, bigger receiver,
Mhm.
perimeter receiver, worked on the outside most of the time. Is Coleman kind of what I said that about him just
Yeah,
now?
I
Is
think
he
the
that
harder
type of
thing
guy?
it's hard when you qualify more physical and gamer, because Gabe Davis plays 100% of the snaps, just never comes off the field and blocks his tail off.
Right. And
I
Coleman
don't
could
know.
do
What's that? Coleman
Coleman
could do that, but I'm not ready to say that Coleman's going to be as good as Davis about that as that coming into the league. So I think he probably has more potential at long term as a fantasy football player than what we've gotten from Gabe Davis so far.
Sure. And I talked about how McConkey won at the Senior Bowl. It's the same way that he won at Georgia, just that route running, and he's got good speed to go with it. Coleman wins with physicality. He's a big guy. He's a former basketball player. So you know all about this, Heath. He's a power forward. He can jump up and bring down those passes, a little bit of Antonio Gates, Tony Gonzalez, a couple of throwbacks there. I don't think he'll be anywhere near as good as those guys, but he'll have the chance to reel in some red zone targets from Josh Allen, some deep balls from Josh Allen, and work that perimeter game. It's something. And there's
Right.
a chance that he could have good target volume given the rest of the receiving core in Buffalo this year. I'm going to draft McConkey first, and I'm going to draft Coleman before Polk. But I do think that Coleman shouldn't just be brushed off as just another big body who we're only going to like because he's in Buffalo. I mean, that's still a pretty good landing spot with some really good opportunities.
Do you feel 100% confident that Coleman's going to see more targets than Khalil Shakir this year?
Yeah, the guy that I'm worried about is Dalton Kincaid. I think Kincaid, and when I say worried, I'm actually kind of excited about it because I love Dalton Kincaid. I think there's a shot here for Kincaid to lead the Bills in targets and Coleman to lead the receivers in targets. Now, he might lead the receivers in targets. Like, there's a world where Kincaid's at 130 targets, Coleman's at 100 targets, and Khalil Shakir's at 95. Okay. But Curtis
Mhm.
Samuel could also get to 95. So
Right.
that's kind of the mess that's there with Coleman. He's got to come out of the gates hot. He's got to really look good in training camp and earn that playing time and earn that role that Gabe Davis had. You mentioned it as a blocker on running downs because that's going to put him on the field. If he stinks at that, he's going to be a part-time player and an absolute bust.
I
What round on Lad McConkey, Heath, in PPR redraft?
I'm often the low guy on these guys, but I'm thinking round 7.
I was
Um,
actually thinking round 6. So this
yeah.
time Well, I mean, I guess you are the low guy. I
Yeah.
guess. Coleman.
I mean, this will change a lot in August depending on how things are going, but I'm
Of
going to
course.
factor in some risk of like him not just taking over as the number one wide receiver right away. I think that's a real risk. So I'm probably round 9.
I'm with you on that. And then Polk, late round pick, if that.
Double digit rounds, yeah.
Dynasty. Rank them in dynasty.
So I have it Ladd, Coleman, and Polk in both redraft and dynasty.
Okay.
I'll take Ladd over him as well. Now they rank higher in that format. And I think Ladd, like if somebody wanted to argue that he should be in the Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas tier, I wouldn't have a great argument against that. I've got him right behind those guys, and I think Ladd could definitely get into round 1 of rookie drafts. Definitely, I think will be in 1 quarterback leagues.
Okay. Makes sense. And then the other guys could be like on the Polk won't be. Polk will be around 2. Maybe Coleman will be on the fence.
I think Coleman will be a round 2 guy too. I'm going to expect
Probably.
that whoever the first couple running backs are go before.
They're definitely gonna
Yeah.
Brooks, Benson. Yeah, those guys are gonna go ahead. All right. Is there any veteran that's gonna lose on this or win on this? I don't think so, because we talked about it at the very beginning. Not a lot of players impacted by the additions of Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, Ja'Lynn Polk with their respective teams. We appreciate you watching, and we are here year-round to help you dominate your seasonal leagues, your dynasty leagues, your bowling leagues. Okay, not the bowling leagues, but everything else. We're here. Fantasy Football Today, CBSSports.com.